Hello, good afternoon. Yeah, following the misconception concerning the new tax laws in Nigeria, I'm making this video to make some clarifications about those laws and also to assist employees understand how the new tax law is going to affect their salaries. Um, to start with, it's good to have a brief understanding of what the laws are and what the content is all about. So there are four laws that were passed. As you can see here, the first one is the Joint Revenue Board of Nigeria Establishment Act 2025. That law came into effect on the 26th of June 2025, and it talks about the objectives of the law and the applications of the law. It talks about the establishment of the Joint Revenue Board. As we may know, the Joint Revenue Board used to be called the Joint Tax Board. So this law have now given it a new name, which is the Joint Revenue Board. So this law also talk about the um, financial provisions of the board. That is, how is the board going to raise its money and how is it going to spend its monies. It talks about also the establishment of a tax appeal tribunal and also the establishment of the office of the tax ombudsman. This law also have a provision for miscellaneous considerations as well. The second law is the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act of 2025. That law also came into effect on the 26th of June 2025. So just like the first law, this law also looks at the objectives and the applications of the law. It talks about the establishment of the Nigerian Revenue Service, which before now used to be the FIRS, the Federal Inland Revenue Service. So it also talks about the establishment and the composition of the governing board of the service. It talks about the management and staff of the service. It also talks about the financial provisions of the board or the service. Then also there is a provision for miscellaneous uh, considerations. The third law is the Nigerian Tax Act of 2025. So this law comes into effect on the 1st of January 2026. And this law seeks to unify all the laws, all the fiscal legislations of Nigeria. It brings them into one. Talking about VAT, talking about personal income tax, company income tax, capital gain tax, and every other law, petroleum gains tax as well. So it tries to bring all of them into one legal framework. So some of the content of this law is about the objectives and applications of the law. It talks about taxation of income of persons. It talks about taxation of income of petroleum operations. It talks about the relief for double taxation. It also talks about taxation of dutiable instruments. It has a chapter for VAT, which is value added tax. Another chapter is for surcharge. It also talks about tax incentives. And there is also a chapter for general provisions. The fourth law, which is the Nigerian Tax Administration Act of 2025 also came into effect on the 1st of January 2026, and this law talks about the objectives and application of the act, talks about jurisdiction and registration of tax authorities. It talks about returns, how to make returns, assessments, and payments of taxes, of the different taxes. It talks about compliance. It talks about enforcement. This law also talks about offenses and penalties that taxpayers will face for default. This law also talks about offenses as relates to petroleum operations. And finally, there is a provision for miscellaneous considerations. Now, having had a kind of overview of what the four laws are about, I just want to look at the personal income tax, which is really what affects the common man. Before now, up to 2025, we had a tax law for PAYE. So this new law, effective 1st of January, stands to overrule the other law. So if you look at the screen, you see I've done a calculation for PAYE as of 2025 and also for 2026. So this computation I've just done will help us to see what the effect of the new tax law is. Permit me to take off this end. All right. Sorry, let me see. Okay, let me put it here. Good. So if we look at this, what we have before us, you see that someone who has an annual income of 800,000, which means his monthly salary gross income is 66,667.77, whatever. Okay, so now his annual is 800. Now this computation I've done, I've made an assumption that there are no tax relief, because ordinarily the law makes provision for tax relief, and you can see on the screen that there's a tax relief for the National Housing Fund contribution. All of these are on annual basis. The NHIS, which is insurance for health, the pension contribution, that is the employee's contribution, then mortgage interest, which is a loan that you possibly take to buy a house for your personal use, then also life insurance premium for yourself or your spouse. This law also made provision for rent relief. This is a unique one that was not in the previous law. So you have rent relief of 20% of your annual rent or 500,000, whichever is lower. So this computation I've done has assumed that you do not have all of this tax relief. So the implication of this is that if you have any of this relief, then your taxable income is not going to be the same as your annual gross income. Your taxable income is going to be lesser than your annual gross income, because you'll be expected to deduct all of this relief from the annual gross income for you to get your annual tax income. I hope that's understood. So, based on our assumption, the annual gross income now equates the taxable income upon which the tax will be computed. So now you find out that the annual tax for 800,000 as your gross annual income is 0. And when you divide that by 12 to get your monthly PAYE is also 0. So that gives you an annual take home of 800,000 and a monthly of 66,666.67, which is exactly the same as your gross monthly income. So in effect, you do not have any tax to pay going by the new tax law. But if you look at this column arrow in the previous, using the previous tax law, you were expected to pay 3,033 naira 0.33 kobo as tax, PAYE tax. So that means there is a difference of 3,033 naira 0.33 kobo. And that in effect means a decrease in taxation for you. So you're likely to take home more money than you usually used to the previous year. So that is just an example for an annual income of 800,000 per annum. Now, if we go down up to someone that is in, say, 500,000, you will see that the person will have a monthly payee of 72,500. This is as against the 74,666.67 that the employee used to pay in the previous month. So these are amounts to a difference of 2,166.67, which is a decrease in taxation for that person. So if we go down further, to someone earning, say, 1.5 million, you will see that the monthly tax will now be 267,500 as against 266,666.67. So at this point, this employee is going to have an effect. The net effect for him is an increase in his tax. So this new law implies that someone earning from 1.5 million per month, which amounts to 18 million per annum. It is at that point that there will be an increase in taxation for the person. Now, the question has been, how do we compute these figures? How do we arrive at these figures? Most times I've heard people say that when you earn 1 million, for instance, your tax will be, some will say 25%, some will say it will be 23%, so say it will be at whatever percent. But that is not how the tax computation is done. There are categorizations of your income. It is put into different boxes. So we have a chunk that will be at 0%. We have another chunk that will be at possibly 15% and all that. So let me just take you down to see how this calculation is done. So you can see here that for the old tax law, we had the rates here. It used to be 7% for the first 300,000, then 11% for the next 300,000, then 15% for the next 500,000, then 19% for the next 500,000, 21% for the next 1.6 million, and 24% for the next 3,200,000. But with this new law, the first 800,000 will be at 0%. Then the next 202,200,000 will be at 15%. The next 9 million will be at 18%. The next 13 million will be at 21%. The next 25 million will be at 23%. Then above 50 million, just as we have in this case, where above 3.2 million will be at 24%. Likewise, in the new law, above 50 million will be at 25%. Mind you, all of these figures are per annum. All of these figures, likewise, are also per annum. These are annual figures. So, to take you through the calculation, if, for instance, your monthly salary is 500,000, as we have here, it implies that your annual income is 500 times 12, which gives us 6 million. So to calculate your tax, your monthly tax, we usually use your annual tax to calculate your monthly tax. Mind you, we are still working with the assumption that you do not have a tax relief. So on that note, the first 800,000 of your 6 million will be taxed at 0 using the new tax law. We tax at 0, so it gives you 0 here. Then the next 2.2 million will be taxed at 15%. That will give you 330,000. Then, when you add this to the first 800 and 2.2 million, that is 3 million already. So 6 million, which is your annual, minus this 3 million that you already have, it means you have a balance of 3 million. And this 3 million comfortably sits under the next category of income, which ought to be 9 million. But you have 3 million left already, so you put the 3 million here. Therefore, the total of all of this now gives you the 6 million, which is your annual. So this 3 million will now be taxed at 18%, which gives you 540,000. So when you add up all of these three figures, 0 plus 330,000 plus 540,000, it gives you 870,000, and that is your annual PAYE tax. So when you divide this annual by 12, it gives you your monthly PAYE tax. So this is 500. So if we go back to our original table and look at the income for 500 per month, I believe we will also get the same figure, 72,500. So let's go right up to 500. This is 500. So if you look at it here, the computation here is giving us 72,500. So that's the computation, how the computation is done to get this. Though this table I have prepared, I've done it such that there is a formula linking all of these, such that if you put in any figure here, it automates and calculates what the tax should be. So this will be very useful even for possibly a company that have a number of staff, and they're looking for possibly like a template for computation of income tax. This will be very, very helpful for such company. Okay, then let's also look at someone earning 1.5 million. So it means that 1.5 million per month for the year, it will amount to 18 million. So just like we did this calculation for 500, it means the first 800 will be at 0%. The next 2.2 million will be at 15%. The next 9 million would be at 18%. And the balance of 6 million will be at 21%. So if you sum up this, you get a total of 3,210,000 as the annual PAYE tax. And when you divide that by 12, you get the monthly tax of 267,500 for that person. So if we go back to our table, this is 1.5 million per month, amounting to 18 million per annum. And likewise, you can see here, as we have here, we're having 267,500 as tax for the month. And like I said earlier, I noticed that it is at the point where someone earns 1.5 million per month and above, that is when the effect of this new tax becomes negative. It's an increase. The person observes an increase in taxation, so it has a negative effect on the employee. So time will not permit me to go further to shed more light on some of the provisions of the law, but I think this will really help employees to understand what they face. So in the long run, I think this new tax is going to give a kind of reduction in tax for low income earners. Yeah. So, but the implementation of the tax law, it's where the challenge might be. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.